I am about to present in this video is a position I have held for a long time, one I arrived at only after I became mature enough to think critically and connect the dots from what I have read and understood about the transatlantic slave trade. I am aware that it is not a popular view, and I understand why. It challenges a narrative many of us are more comfortable holding on to. But over time, I have come to believe that discomfort should not prevent us from confronting the truth. As I reflected on history, I found myself asking questions that are often left unasked, not just about those who bought, but also about those who sold. That process of questioning shaped my perspective and led me to a conclusion that may be difficult, but in my view, necessary. For me, this is not about shifting blame or diminishing the role of external forces. It is about acknowledging the full picture, however uncomfortable it may be, and holding all parties accountable. It is from this standpoint that I share these thoughts. The transatlantic slave trade began in the 15th century, when European powers such as Portugal, Spain, Britain, and France expanded along the West African coast. What began as trade in gold and other goods evolved into a system driven by plantation economies in the Americas. The demand for labor transformed human beings into commodities, creating the triangular trade system, one of the darkest chapters in human history. European merchants and states built and sustained the demand. Figures like John Hawkins helped establish England's early involvement. They financed and organized slave voyages, created global markets for enslaved labor, institutionalized slavery into law and economy. Without this demand, the system would not have expanded to such a devastating scale. King Charles II directly supported and invested in the slave trade, helped institutionalize it through royal backing of trading companies. Christopher Columbus' voyages opened the Americas to European colonization, indirectly triggered the demand for enslaved labor after indigenous populations declined. Bartolomé de las Casas initially supported the use of African slaves to replace indigenous labor, later became a critic of slavery, showing how the system evolved over time. James Watt and industrial expansion. Britain. While not a slave trader himself, his steam engine innovations powered the Industrial Revolution. Industries like cotton, heavily dependent on slave labor, fueled European wealth. Shows how slavery became embedded in global economic systems. European merchants, monarchs, and institutions did not just participate, they built and sustained the system. Figures like John Hawkins pioneered England's involvement, while institutions such as the Royal African Company, backed by King Charles II, industrialized the trade. The expansion into the Americas following Christopher Columbus's voyages created massive demand for labor, further entrenching slavery into the global economy. The role of African kings and leaders. It is interesting to note that some African rulers and states did not just exist during this period. They actively engaged in and, in some cases, benefited from the trade. King Gezo, Dahomey. He expanded military campaigns to capture people for sale and resisted ending the trade because it sustained his kingdom's economy. King Agaja, Dahomey. He conquered key coastal trading centers like Ouidah, giving Dahomey control over major slave export routes. In Nzinga Mbemba, Congo. He initially cooperated with the Portuguese, but later protested the destructive impact of the slave trade on his people. Queen Nzinga, Ndongo Matamba. She resisted Portuguese domination, yet also engaged in slave trading as part of political and military strategy. Osei Tutu, Ashanti Empire. He built a powerful state through warfare, where captives sometimes entered the slave trade through coastal networks. The Kingdom of Benin, in present-day Nigeria, presents a more complex example. Oba Esigie, Oba Ehengbuda. Benin initially traded in goods like ivory and pepper, and maintained structured control over its dealings with Europeans. At various points, it restricted or reduced participation in slave trading. However, it did not remain completely outside the system. When involved, slaves were often prisoners of war or convicted individuals. Trade was state-controlled, not as commercially aggressive as in some other kingdoms. This shows an important truth. African participation was not uniform, but it was present. History shows that European powers created and expanded demand. African leaders and intermediaries supplied captives in varying degrees. Millions of Africans became victims of both systems. This is why the story cannot be told from only one angle. From then to now, has anything really changed? The disturbing reality is that the pattern has not disappeared. It has evolved. Africa remains rich in natural resources, oil, lithium, rare earth metals, gold. Yet many nations struggle. Why? Because foreign powers and corporations still seek control. Deals are still negotiated behind closed doors. And once again, African leaders are often part of the system. In Nigeria, crude oil is stolen and sold illegally. Public wealth is diverted into private hands. Across Cameroon and Ivory Coast, questions remain about leadership accountability and whose interests are truly being served. So we must ask, who signs these agreements? Who benefits the most? Who allows exploitation to continue? The hard truth we must accept. We are quick to blame external forces, and often rightly so. But why do we hesitate to question our own leaders with the same intensity? Fear may silence many, but it does not erase the truth. Then, it was the sale of people. Today, it is the sale of resources and futures. While Western leaders put their citizens first and make their welfare top priorities, African leaders, on the other hand, has now assumed the role of the colonial masters and continue to unleash terror on their citizens. They corner state resources to themselves, their allies and their families, while their citizens suffer and wallow in poverty. To many African citizens, it is as if colonialism never ended because it created monsters out of African leaders. If we truly want change, honesty must come first. The slave trade was driven by external demand and internal participation. Today's exploitation is driven by foreign interests and local complicity. No one should be completely exonerated. Not the buyers, not the sellers, not the past, not the present. Because until we confront the full truth, without bias, without fear, we risk repeating the same cycle, just in a different form.